This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Molecule, the reinvented air purifier. For $75 off your first order, visit molecule.com and use the promo code MacVoices at checkout. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, you'll remember a little while back that we focused on a piece that was shown at MacStock called Love Notes to Newton. We talked to Noah, the producer. There was a short shown at MacStock that never made the film, but I thought it was interesting, and it led me to David Greelish, who is the author of this book right here, Classic Computing, and is also a computer historian. And we're going to talk old tech, new tech, a little bit of everything in between. Dave, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I'm so happy to have you. As I said in the intro, the first time I've kind of learned about you was through the Newton, the Love Notes to Newton short that you published or is published on YouTube right now. And so let's get started there. How did that come about? I know it didn't end up in the actual film, but it's also a very high quality piece.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I take a lot of pride in that. It's kind of my experiment of I'm trying to move more into doing media production, and I even have plans to do my own full-on documentary sometime soon. But how it came about is I found Noah's project on Indiegogo, and I love documentaries. I've always loved documentaries, all kinds of documentaries. Obviously, specifically ones about computer history and Apple in particular, Steve Jobs, plenty of those. So I looked for them, and I found the one about For the Love of Newton, Love Notes to Newton. Better get it right. For the Love of Newton, that'd be a good title. So I supported it. And then I reached out to him and I said, hey, if you need anything I can do, I would love to collaborate or help in some way. And so he actually contacted me, and we had a few conversations, and he asked my advice about some things, like threw some ideas at me, and I was very happy to do that. But then I pitched him about that short, and I said, well, what do you think if I made, you could use it in the documentary or not, because it'd just be a great thing for me to do. But what if I made like a short history of the personal computer, and then it would put the Newton into a better perspective? You're telling a particular story, and it certainly has, but it's primarily the history of the Newton and not the bigger picture. And this kind of puts it into that bigger picture. And he liked the idea. So that's basically what I did.
And it came off really, really, really nice. I'm
Thanks.
Sorry it wasn't included in the film itself, but I also sort of understood why, because you're right. You put a frame around it rather than just focused on the Newton, and I really appreciate that. There are a lot of folks around who probably have never even seen a Newton, let alone know what it was or had one in their hands. Right,
and it tells a lot of history in under 6 minutes. So, and you're right. The style I did was sort of jarringly different than the style of the documentary. So I understood why he wanted to keep it separated. But I mean, I'm very happy that he's including it as an extra. And so if you go rent or buy the film, it's one of the extras. And then, I also have it. You can go watch it for free on YouTube. And then he played it at MacStock, and he intends to play it at other showings of the film. So I'm really honored by that. But it tells a lot of hardware history. Of course, there's lots of computer history, and so it doesn't even begin to go into all the other aspects of computer history. But, in a little under 6 minutes, basically what the story that was told there is, it tells the story of the 4 generations of computing, which ultimately the 4th generation is what we're in now, personal computing. And then it goes into what I call the 3 tiers of personal computing, which started with the desktop, then the laptop, and then the handheld. And so basically we're all using handheld computers, right, with our iPhones, our Android devices. And the Newton kind of really fits in there. It was a big part of that. That final evolution, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how many things that were part of the Newton eventually ended up, at least conceptually, in the iPhone and the iPad. The Newton was definitely a much different device. And I know Noah talked about when he was here that it sort of represented, at least in his mind, a path that personal computing could have taken, but didn't. And for whatever reasons. And folks, you really need to go watch the documentary. It really is interesting, because you too will come to understand what that means in a much deeper sense than we can get into here.
And he did a great job. I think it's an excellent documentary. And I felt like he did a really great job of mixing, like it's a film that plays to the fan community, which is a small community, right? Of people that are on fire for the Apple Newton at this point in time. But it plays to them very well. But it tells the story of the people involved in its development, the people who still love it now. But then it's good for the general public, because it's just an interesting piece, and then it tells all the history around it, which maybe not everybody's into, but I think it plays well to everybody.
Well, and at some point, the old saying, you don't know where you're going till you know where you've been, and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we don't focus a lot here on MacVoices looking back at the quote unquote good old days.
Right.
But you also need to pay attention to some of the good old days to get a little perspective on where you are now and what an amazing thing you have sitting in front of you. And, the amazing things are going to come out next. So
tell Apple that. They never look back.
Well, and that was one of Steve Jobs' things, and it's something I respected for him about him, because it would have been very easy for somebody like Steve or Apple as a company to rest on their laurels and say, "Boy, look at all these amazing things we've done. Now let's put our feet up." And
especially right now.
Yeah. Instead, they don't. They push forward. They're the first $1 trillion market cap company, and we're expecting new hardware that'll be bigger and better than ever, in the fall. And so that's a great thing. But at the same time, you do have to pay a little bit of attention to where you came from.
I agree.
So how did you get into, what is a computer historian and how did you get into it?
So I think I have a pretty good story that I'll make it really short. So the quick version of this story is I went to college. I was a young man once, and I went to college in 1986. And then I always knew I loved computers, and I won't even go into why or some of that. But I knew computers were going to be some part of my future and as an adult. So ultimately, I went to college. And then I got a part-time job, and I actually got a job in a computer store. And this is in an area in Frederick, Maryland, which I'm from Florida, actually, originally. But in the store, we sold Apple computers, HP, IBM, Compaq, Epson, and I'm probably forgetting one other one. But probably 90% of everything that went out the door was PC, was DOS compatible, right? This is before Wintel, nomenclature or whatever. But internally in the store, we used Macs for everything. And so I was new to computers, and so I'm using the Mac that write up little letters to customers and sales forms and other stuff. So I was sold immediately, like, this is the computer I want one day, and versus DOS machine. So it wouldn't be for a few years that I could ever even try to afford one. So the rest of the story is I ended up working. So I dropped out of college, ultimately went back to college in 1989 in Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is. Worked at an Apple dealer because I was on fire for Mac then, and had no hope of affording a Mac. So even the cheapest Mac Plus with a 20 megabyte hard drive that it would sit on top of, even with my discount, it was like off the top of my head, $1,800 or so. That's $1,989. But one day this guy came in the store, and he's coming in the front door with what looks like he's carrying this like double wide Mac. And he carries it to the service department. And I'm just like, what is that? So he leaves it for the guy, and then I go over there and look at it. And it was actually an Apple Lisa. And without going too much into that, it was rebranded the Mac XL later on. And so a lot of people used Apple Lisas as Macintoshes. So I was just like amazed by this machine, just like really, intrigued by it. So I just started researching what the heck was this. And so I found that there's this little company in Utah called Sun Remarketing, and they actually have you heard the story about how Apple buried all the Apple leases in a landfill? And have you ever heard that story?
I have.
So one of the last things Steve Jobs did before he left Apple was cancel the Apple Lisa. And so basically they sold all of them to this company in Utah, Sun Remarketing, and they were taking them and fixing them up to run like Macs, and they were new old stock Lisas. So I bought one in 1989 because it was $1,100 compared to like $1,800, and that was my first Mac. And I was just so fascinated and intrigued by this. First, it became my first Mac, and I love Macs. And I got going in the desktop publishing industry at that point and pre-press. But then I just became so intrigued by it and its history, and then how it failed, and then the Mac, and then the two Steves, and then Apple, and then it just grew. And so Apple has always been kind of my first love and my most passionate interest, but that evolved into computer history. And what I discovered in the early 90s, I had an idea, maybe I'll collect old computers. That would be interesting. And to most people, it was garbage. It was absolutely garbage. They put it out on the road. And you know what I mean? So I was able to buy the stuff or given to me for next to nothing. And so for me in the early 90s when I got started, it was like I could experience these computers like for the first time, as if it was, you know, the mid to late 70s, if you will, to the 80s. So I hope that wasn't too long. That's kind of the short story of it. But that's where it got started. I thought it'd be a neat hobby to start collecting old computers, especially Macs.
And so how many do you have at this point?
So I've been doing this a long time. And again, to keep it short, ultimately, I at one point at my height, if you will, I had a 2-car garage full, my office full, probably 2 rooms in the house. So I had a lot. I can sit here and tell you I have probably owned every significant American-made personal computer ever made. So at some point, I really had the idea of maybe I could open a museum one day, and that's just didn't become practical in the long run. So that's before I had kids and before we moved around. So here I sit 25 plus years later, and I have 3 kids, 2 are grown now, and we've moved around quite a bit over the years. So that's kind of what happened to the collection. I kind of kept scaling it back. So right now, to answer your question, so 2 of my favorites are Macintoshes and Elisa, and then the Commodore 64. So I have, I think I have like 25 miscellaneous computers, but a good number of Macs and Commodores, and then other miscellaneous. And I have a lot of handhelds because I kind of switched to them because they're small and they were also cheap and not worth a lot. I could acquire them. So we have a show called the Vintage Computer Festival here southeast, and so I just did a display of that just this last show.
Very nice. Very nice.
I can fit those all in one little plastic bin, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Start looking around so I can show you something in here, but
I'm sure they're just out of eyesight. Well, so you couldn't open a museum, but you created a little bit of a museum with this book, which I thought was interesting. When I first picked it up, I didn't quite know what to expect, and I quickly realized, obviously, that it's a collection of articles, and I'll let you talk about the source of the articles.
Okay.
Documenting, some of those early days, and I mean, it brought back some memories for me, no question about it. And so, how did the book come about in the collection of material?
So the kind of the key thing, so I loved history. I've always loved history, but I loved the Mac and I loved history, and I started digging into the Apple history, specifically the Mac, and that just made me on fire for computer history. And I was getting every book I could get a hold of and reading it. So I had joined the Army, and I had got married, and I was ultimately in Germany. And so I got online for the first time, and I've been online ever since. So even though we lived in a house in Germany, I was able to get on CompuServe in 1992 and dial a local German phone number, so no long distance, and I was able to be on the American CompuServe. Oh, my. So from there, I started, believe it or not, even back then, there were some other people interested in computer history and even were interested in some old computers. And so I was part of a little small group there. But I decided whenever I returned to the United States, that's when I think I'll start collecting computers. That was the first germ of the whole thing. So it was, March of '93, we moved back to the United States, and I went to my last duty station, El Paso, Texas, which is Fort Bliss. And so from there, I actually started actively collecting computers. And then I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I could make like a newsletter and start writing articles and see if other people are interested in this. And that's basically the genesis of that book. Is I ultimately did 9 original newsletter issues, or zines that came to be known, fanzines. And so over a period of about 3 years, I published those. It's supposed to have been bi-monthly, which I did for a few bi-months. but then we had our first kid and other stuff going on. Yes. So it kind of got further and further apart. And ultimately, it kind of died out after 9 issues. So I think it's the main gist of the whole thing. But at one point I had about 500 paid subscribers, and a lot of them international, most US, and it actually was sold in a couple of computer museums. So it was sold at the American, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's basically the Smithsonian Museum of American History or whatever, where they used to have the computers on display. So it was actually the zine, not the book, wasn't created yet, was actually sold there. And then the Computer Museum, which was in Boston, the Computer History, no, just the Computer Museum is called. It ultimately moved to California, where it's now the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. So anyway,
Yeah.
so so it was very active for a while, but it kind of, my life got really complicated, and I got broke and stuff, and it kind of died out by the late 90s.
Well, and that it probably, I mean, knowing how user groups were going for a while, and how they have evolved and changed.
Yeah.
A zine kind of thing. I mean, you were starting to get into the very early days of the web in the early
Right.
90s. And so some of it was moving to the web, and now
Right.
there's an awful lot of stuff on the web. And of course, I'm not sure. I never really thought about it this way. That our podcast to some degree sort of the modern zine at this point.
Well, and that's what I moved into later on. So starting around 2007, I think I did my first one. Is I would kind of say so, that it was kind of, it feeds at least the small ones. They sort of feed a specific little fan community, and so some of the ones I did, I think did that. So so by the late 90s, I had. I got a website, and I tried to start doing some web publishing, but I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't do a whole lot of it, and it kind of did a little bit, but ultimately I started doing more of that, and then I moved into then I discovered podcasting like 2006, and trying to keep my head straight on the story to tell you here, but one of the earliest podcasts I found was actually a computer history podcast called Retro Bits. And a guy named Earl Evans, and you can still find those online. And the great thing about history is it doesn't get old per se, because you can listen to an old podcast about history and it's still, it's not dated, right? Because it's about history. So, and then there's one that's still going called the Retro Maccast. Been around since I think same year, 2006 or 2007. They don't do it as often, but they're still doing it. And so I decided I want to try to do podcasting. So I moved into doing some podcasting, and ultimately messed around doing some little video stuff here and there, not a lot. But that's kind of where I am now, is I want to fully move into video. I write a lot too.
Yeah. So you just can't stay away, can you?
No. It's definitely my passion. It's definitely, I feel like I have I had wanted to be a teacher at one point when I was younger and when I went to college. And I think I kind of have a knack for that. And I'm glad you liked my video, and I'm proud of it. And I think I did a good job, right, of sort of conveying information in an entertaining and in a good way that people can, even if they only have a passing interest, they can get something out of it. And I think that's important. Is presenting things so anybody can kind of enjoy it.
Well, and it does take a talent to boil something like that down. The whole story of the Newton and its place in computing, and to try to make it not obviously not comprehensive. You can't be comprehensive in 6 minutes, but to put that frame around it and show that yes, this was an important device, as opposed to any of a dozen machines that we could both probably name if we really tried. That
right.
They're part of history, but they're not really important.
Right. Yeah. Significance matters, obviously, in the story. So, the Newton really does, it stands up as significant. So, and people like to call it a failure. And the great thing about that documentary, it sort of points out in the end how, I guess it was a market failure, but it really wasn't just a failure. And in many ways, especially the way things influence other things, it's not really fair to call them, they're not complete failures either. But the computer industry is full of that sort of thing. Like, the first 3 or 4 versions of Windows were absolute failures. And then finally, Windows 3, it kind of got it right. So.
Oh, we could argue over that, but we won't go down that.
Well,
yeah. Relatively speaking, perhaps.
And right, exactly. Yeah. I didn't like Windows 3. I wasn't going to switch from the Mac. Let me just say that.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have, Dave. So what is it about these machines? What is it about? And I'll point to the Newton. I'll point to the Mac. I'll point to a lot of different machines. What is it about them that creates the fan mentality? I mean, back in those days, Jobs and Woz didn't have quite the cult following of the cult of personality following, if you will, there was definitely, there were Apple purists and fans, but what is it that creates that? Because I know people, you're not the only one. I know plenty of people that absolutely long for the days of, computer X or handheld Y, and they still think that was the best machine they ever had. What is it about these machines that does this?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer I think is kind of, at least on some extent, explains even why does anybody go after more unique things? And I think we all have, maybe not all, a lot of people, myself included, I guess, have a desire to be special. And I think, and unique, right? And especially, and I know other people, other Americans enjoy being individuals as well, but I think it is a strong American cultural thing to be individualistic, a strong individuality. And I think so being special, and so that conveys into in the tech world as the bleeding edge. Right. And that a lot of people want to be first adopters because it makes them special. Right. The people lined up for the first, iPhone and so on. So I think that had a lot to do with it. So in 1993 with the Apple Newton, I think a lot of the people, they were early adopters. Right. They wanted to be first and they wanted to be special. They walk around with their Newtons, and it was cool in 1993. People, so it's always kills me. People like to laugh at the past or make fun of stuff. And it's like, you have to put yourself in that time that it was, that was cool then. It was really a great product. Yeah, it was flawed in a lot of ways, and it seems big now and everything, but it was small at the time. For instance, if someone looks at a luggable, which, with the earliest portable computers, they look like big sewing machines, right? And the reason they were designed in a certain way because they would just fit under an airline seat. They were literally portable. You could take them on an airplane and fly somewhere with them like a business person. That was an important design part of, that was important. And it's easy to laugh at it now, but that was unique and special, and and not everybody could travel with their computer. So I think it has a lot to do with stuff, and I think design has a lot to do with, starting with Steve Jobs before he left Apple. Obviously, Steve Jobs coming back to Apple, from the aesthetics of external design, and I think John Scully and all the people still at Apple during that middle time, design was important. I mean, at Apple specifically too, is they were computers in general that were just more unique looking, and I think a lot of people appreciate that. I know I do. I think that's one of the really interesting things about any old computer is that they're very unique looking. The designs were everything wasn't not commoditized, homogenized. Is that the right word? Yeah. Things were, I mean, as much as I love modern, like my Mac right here, which is modern, I love its design. But they're all starting to look. Now, this feels a lot better than the HP that looks like it. But you know what I'm saying? It's nothing that unique about how it looks anymore. It's all kind of, right? In a smartphone, it's all a slab with a screen, pretty much. They're all becoming the same. So,
yeah, we were having this discussion the other day that, at some point, have we reached the ultimate design? Have we reached the ultimate desktop with an iMac? Where the computer is behind the screen and you don't even, it's a lot of people still ask, where's the computer? Have we reached the ultimate personal communication device other than debating over size and width and maybe thickness? But is that slab that fits in your hand and glass on the front, is that the ultimate design short of some kind of biological interface? So
I kind of think we're in a plateau with all this computer designs.
Yeah, and I see people, well, I want something new. I want it to look different. Okay, exactly. What do you want? What does this design not do for you? And then you get a blank stare back. So that's where I think it is. You're right. I mean, all those early computers had personalities.
Yeah.
Sometimes out of practicality, sometimes out of, crazy design, not always good design, but just crazy design.
Right.
And then we have the iMac, the original iMac, the Bondi Blue iMac, and then the candy colors that, those were computers that you just wanted to own. And I don't know even why, but you wanted to own that. Maybe to your point, because it was unique, but it definitely appealed.
I think because they were very personal objects. I had an iMac. I had a Blueberry iMac in 2000. And I loved it. And, I just think it was something more, it was personal. Yeah, but again, it's easy also to make fun of like beige machines. With Apple made a lot of beige machines, but like the Performa series, the all-in-one like 580s and 575s, and even the bigger sort of iMac like machines they made, they're all in one. I thought those are cool looking designs. The beige part of it made them kind of a little boring. Even back then, I had wished that Apple had made gray computers or black or whatever. A lot of people used to say that. Yeah, but I just think design, I think that has a lot to do with it. And I like to use the parallel of cars. And there's a lot of cool car designs. There's always new cars coming out, and you can appreciate their style. And they're unique, but I don't know if they're as unique. Like take a time frame of like the late 40s through maybe the early 60s. And so obviously the 50s are right in the middle, right? And car designs were, man, there's some similarities between all the different fins and stuff. But I mean, the way cars changed from the late 40s and the way they changed in the early 60s and then that 50s and just how, right? It was like all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the stuff. It's just really, yeah.
Well,
I think that was the heyday and, like the 1970s or early 80s of the computers.
Well, and it's funny, you took that analogy right out of my head because I was thinking of that gee, when the 1960s, 1970 vehicles, any model year that came out, it's like, whoa, isn't that cool? And now you look back and some of them retain the cool factor, and frankly, some look very dated and very uncool.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was something. And same thing with the computers. I will definitely show my bias here. I don't think most of the Mac computers, other than just the iconic little design, really showed that much age. The trends of the future were definitely there. There were some left turns in design along the way, but you were just in the process of working this design, and a lot of it had to do with what could be done, what the engineering and what the manufacturing technologies were of the day to make them and make them affordable and reasonable so that you could use them. Right,
and that's always been a big factor in design, and the limiting factor in the design, right, is what's capable, how small. I mean, so like the Apple Newton, the reason it was, I have one just almost out of reach here. So it is out of reach. But, the Newton, much smaller than your smartphone, right, or what the Palm Pilot came to be. I mean, that was really small. That was quite a feat to have made it that size. And I'm sure maybe a lot of the engineers felt, too, they didn't want to make the screen too small. But, what you could cram inside made a lot of the reasoning as to, limitations of the size, just like the earliest portable computers as luggables and even laptops. Like, have you ever looked at a 20-year-old laptop now? Like, it seems so crazy thick. It doesn't seem like you can't help but laugh at it. It's like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Because now they're ridiculously small. I remember, it was only 8 years ago that Steve Jobs stood up on the stage and pulled out an iPad for the first time. And do you remember thinking, like, even though we already had the iPhone, we're pretty impressed by that. But I remember just thinking, like, holy, how did they put everything in there? It's just, and then if you look at the iPad now compared to a modern one, it seems so thick.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, even if you go back to, several iterations of the iPhone, I mean, by today's standards, it's thick. Right. And, and of course, there's always the debate of, are we getting too thin, or is that just an obsession we don't need? But at the end of the day, that's where we are. And I admit, I go back and pick up different machines or see somebody with one and think, I used to lug a 5-6 pound computer around, forget the 20 or 30 pound luggables. Right. Yeah. And now I'm quite happy, having something a whole lot thinner and nicer that, I can take to lunch with me and, an iPad, or for that matter, a MacBook, and, maybe get some work done or watch something or whatever. And, it's just the evolution. But you're right. We do sometimes tend to look back and laugh a little bit. But boy, at the time, these were amazing machines, and we all got a lot of work done on those machines.
Yeah.
Molecule is sponsoring this week's Mac Voices, and I'm excited about that because I always get excited about a new product that comes my way that's really worth telling you about. Molecule is the culmination of EPA-funded research into making a better air purifier. Not just a better air filter, but a purifier that can actually destroy indoor air pollutants, not just filter them out. You may think you're using state-of-the-art technology if you're using a HEPA filter solution, But did you know that the HEPA filter was invented in the 1940s during the Second World War? Not exactly cutting edge anymore. Molecule is effective against a full range of indoor air pollutants, including those up to 1,000 times smaller than a HEPA filter can address. Whether it's pet dander, pollen, or whatever, Molecule is your best bet for having cleaner air. When your Molecule arrives, you unpack it from its box and protective bag, plug it in, and you're up and running. Well, almost. You do need to pair it with the Molecule app on your phone so you can control it remotely, monitor the status of your filters, and set the fan speed to normal, silent, or boost. Using the app also lets you sign up and have the filters delivered automatically when you need them, rather than having to do it yourself. As far as control, you can also use the touchscreen on the top of the device to set the fan speeds manually. Do you want to breathe better air? Molecule is your answer. Molecule users report some amazing results, including one customer who said she was able to breathe through her nose for the first time in 15 years. I'm loving my Molecule because I think it's making a difference for me, and I think you'll love it too. And by being a MacVoices listener, you can have cleaner air and save some money. Visit molecule.com, that's MOLEKULE.com, and use the discount code MacVoices at checkout, and you take $75 off your first order. Again, that's $75 off your first order at molecule.com with the code MacVoices at checkout. Thanks to Molecule for their support of MacVoices.
And if you think about the nature of computing, right now we're in a world where this has only been this way realistically. I wouldn't even say 20 years. I'm gonna say 15 to 18 years. You're at work. You're in a traditional work. I don't know if you go out to work to a corporate environment or something. If the network goes down, work's done. All work stops.
Yes.
If you don't have a network, you don't have your computer is pointless, right? But again, just 18, 20 years ago, people did all kinds of work with no internet or no network.
Sure.
And isn't that crazy to think about?
Well, it's not that long ago that you think that management was debating, okay, how much reliance should we place on these machines? Because to your point, if the power goes out, if something goes down, we're out of business. And now it's just sort of an accepted thing. Yeah, if the power's out or the internet connection's down, okay, so we sit and twiddle our thumbs and wait for it to come back because you really are almost 100% out of business.
Right. But I mean, that can blow some young people's minds to think about computers without the internet. That's what's the point. But those of us old enough, I got my start, with computers doing desktop publishing, and I didn't have any. Well, technically I did because I still had CompuServe AOL, but I was, I had to choose to be online because it was per the hour or whatever back then. So you generally got on, got your email, got off,
Yep.
Or you're specifically focused on doing something and you get off because you're gonna get billed.
And even in that environment, the communities still rose up. People still communicated, banded together. That's it.
Yeah.
It really, in hindsight, it really always, to a large degree, has been about community of one kind or another.
Yeah.
And now we have these all new ways of creating communities. We have obviously the Facebooks and the Twitters, but we have Slack and we have some of the things on the Windows side, and everybody's trying to create a community that I think meets their needs and the needs of their friends. Mm-hmm. And then it gets co-opted, and then you go and build a new one. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting story to be told. Is that how I think it was inevitable, or it's always been, well, not always, but with personal computing, that computers ultimately were for, like I say, communities and communication. And so if you start going backwards again, so before the internet's made lots of that possible. And of course, having smartphones and handheld computers has made that even more possible because we can have it with us all the time, right? But go back further before the internet, like I was talking about with, as soon as I got on CompuServe, one of the earliest things I was able to start doing was emailing, communicating with people and getting into communities. I found one from the Computer Shopper magazine, by the way. And I met a guy named Stan Veet, who was a very early, he was the early editor of Computer Shopper, and he used to write a series of articles called Whatever Happened To. So he was kind of a computer historian. And so I made a connection early on with him and then some other people interested in that sort of thing. But But I guess what I was getting to is if you go before that, you had BBSs. And just by the way, because I'm thinking about it, and it's free to watch for anybody. There is a great documentary series called BBS, and it's like 5 or 6 parts. And if you just search for it, you can find it. So it's a history of BBSs and is it FidoNet and some of that stuff.
Yeah,
and it's really good. It's by Jason Scott, and it's really good. Well, and it tells a lot of the story of that part of. The history of online services and again communities and people getting together and stuff. And it's one of my favorites.
Thank you. I'll try to find it and make sure I have a link in the show notes for folks because
I can send it to you if you need to.
Yeah, please, because that's something obviously I would be interested in.
Yeah, I mean he still sells it. I think he still as a DVD set. I have it, and but you can watch it free online. He puts it online for free.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so where do folks go to get the book, and where do they go to find out more about you and what your projects are?
So my website is classiccomputing.com. So go there. And just by the way, so my zine was called Historically Brewed. And it was a play on words because people would historically home brew their computer. And then one of the earliest user groups called the Homebrew Computer Club. So I thought it was a catchy, Historically Brewed. Frankly, it probably was a bad name, and a lot of people didn't get it, unless they were really interested, then they figured it out. So actually, one of the last things I did before I stopped printing was I renamed it Classic Computing because I thought that was a much better name for a magazine. if I could ever make it a real magazine, because it tells you exactly what it's about, right? And then ultimately I got classiccomputing.com and I did my website. So anyway, classiccomputing.com, and on there you can read the first issue of Historically Brewed for free, or buy the book from me if you like. It's $23 shipped, through PayPal. If you also, I have a bunch of articles on there. I've also interviewed some famous people. So one I'd like to mention is Ed Roberts, and Ed Roberts was the creator of what's generally considered the first personal computer, the MITS Altair. And it's a really, I think it's a really interesting, his story is really unique and interesting. And it was 1995 I interviewed him early on. And so that's a good interview. I interviewed John Scully. So I'm kind of proud of that. That was a very interesting one. And I basically explained how he didn't really fire Steve Jobs and really how a lot of good things happened at Apple and came out of Apple, while he was in charge. He didn't just run it into the ground, which is kind of a misconception. So anyway, so I have some interviews and my podcasts and articles and all that good stuff.
Great. Well, thank you. Sounds like there's a lot of interesting stuff there, especially if you are interested in the history of personal computing and of Apple too. This has been fun. This is not something we usually do, but this has been really fun. And I'm hesitant, so I'll let you tell me. Do you want to tell folks what your next project is?
Thank you. Yes, I do. I thought about it, and I think it's a good thing to mention. I'm pretty serious. I've announced it on a few specialty areas on Facebook and some different groups. So I have formally announced that I am pursuing to make a documentary. So I love documentaries. I eat them up. I watch them all the time. It's been in the back of my mind for years. Like, could I really do this? So anyway, jump to the thing is, the Apple Lisa was the catalyst of all of this for me. And so it was almost like a aha moment recently. Seriously, where I went, why don't I make a documentary about the Apple Lisa? And definitely Noah and the Newton documentary and being involved in that. And I think that made me think about it more, because I think it to a certain extent, it parallels the Newton in some respects. It's considered one of the big failed products of Apple. But I would argue, and so this will probably be the main theme of the documentary, is the Apple Lisa actually stands pretty tall as the foundation of all modern computing, at least commercially, at least to the consumer. Now, you can go back further, and certainly the work of Douglas Engelbart at Stanford Research Institute, and there's a documentary coming out about him, and that looks really great. He was very pivotal in all this, and also the work at Xerox PARC. If anyone knows anything about the Apple Lisa and the story of Steve Jobs and how they went to Xerox PARC and they stole all the ideas and all this stuff, which they didn't, then they would know that. But the Apple Lisa is really the first commercially successful, but full-fledged, commercially available graphical user interface computer. It is the predecessor of what we all use now. And actually, more directly, we probably have the Mac the way it is right now because of the Apple Lisa, because Steve Jobs used to be in charge of the Apple Lisa. And Steve Jobs was a very difficult guy at Apple in 1983. So Steve Jobs got kicked off the Apple Lisa project. So what he decided to do was go take over the Macintosh project, and he was going to show them by making a cheaper, smaller, better Lisa, which you and I are both talking on right now. And basically, what we're using, the Lisa, and what we're using, the Mac, really, arguably give Microsoft, Google all the credit in the world, because Apple obviously borrowed some ideas and built upon other things. But what we're using, and the Lisa and the Mac, it helped make Windows what it was. And then the iOS came out of the Mac OS. A lot of people forget that Steve Jobs announced that at the introduction of the iPhone, how it was built on Mac OS, the iPhone OS. And then, of course, Android a year later, came out at the same basic paradigm, right, of the touch interface. So it all ties in there. So I think that its story needs to be told.
And it's just your quick walk through it there. It's easy to forget that everybody kind of stands on everybody else's shoulders. Right. That there are reasons, there are pieces of it. Sure, there are things that were failures, but there were pieces of those failures that went on to be pieces of big successes.
Right.
So,
and a lot of ideas come back. They're not at the right time or the right ability, and then they come back. But like earlier on, you mentioned about things that the Apple Newton could do or tried to do, and they're really just now being implemented. And in the iPad with the pencil, even some of the stuff with that. A lot of people, too, they like to go, oh, I thought Apple's never going to have a stylus. Well, Apple doesn't really have a stylus because you're not using it as the interface control. You're using it as a pencil, I guess is the best word, or whatever. As a stylus.
Yep. I know. I get so tired of that. It's like, okay, I can operate my phone just fine without a pencil, or my iPad without a pencil. If I want to do some finely detailed work, that's great. But I would not want to give a doctor a chainsaw, and I wouldn't want to give a lumberjack a scalpel. Different tools for different things. But at the end of the day,
that took time for that idea and for that to kind of come back.
Yeah.
And actually Microsoft gets a lot of credit for some of that direction too. So, Apple's borrowed from Microsoft over the years and vice versa, and, stolen, if you will, either way, whatever.
Yeah. Well, they both stole, everybody steals. what Jobs say, great artists steal.
Yeah.
David, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. This has been a whole lot of fun.
Too.
We got to get you back, and definitely as the work gets done on the Lisa documentary, come back and tell us about it if you want to, or wait until it gets done and then definitely come back and tell us all about it.
Let's make it a date.
You got it. It's done.
I would love to come back on and tell you about it. Yeah, that'd be exciting.
It's done.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Last thing, are you on social media?
Yes, so I have obviously my webpage. I'm on Twitter. Just my personal account, I guess, on Facebook. But I'll be creating one for the documentary. So I'll be creating a Facebook page and I guess another Twitter account. But yes, I'm on social media.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll have links to everything, folks, in the show notes, so you can find David, see everything he's done and everything he's going to do.
Yeah, maybe I can show the documentary at next year's MacStock.
I think we could probably get Mike Potter to agree to that. I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Yeah, I'd love to go. So that's a plan too.
All right.
Hopefully I can do that.
There we go. Dave, thanks so much.
I appreciate it.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Again, this has been a little bit different for us. I hope you've enjoyed a look back and maybe get a little perspective on where we are and where we're going, because that's where we're all going to live, is in the future. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Mac Voices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple Tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep Mac Voices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.